Yo! So after finishing my previous video on Sumeru's Archon Quest Act 5, I wanted to now specifically talk about Nahida's character. We first got introduced to her in 3.0 where it was confirmed that she is the Dendro Archon Lesser Lord Kusanali. I feel like just from her introduction alone, there was already a lot of interesting details to think about, such as how she's the youngest Archon yet, having ascended to being an Archon during the Cataclysm, and how she's a Lesser Lord, which is contrasted to the previous Dendro Archon, Greater Lord Rukkhadevata. While she's notable for her young appearance amongst the Archons, I think the most interesting aspects about her are her inferiority complex and imposter syndrome that she has as an Archon, often describing herself as the lesser, darker moon compared to the greater, brighter sun that was Rukkhadevata. In Sumeru, at least in the Sabzeruz festival, the moon is often associated with illusions and lies. So it's a pretty negative way to describe oneself. Sumeru is the fourth nation that we enter, and it's the first where most of the people legit do not worship, nor are they even aware of their current Archon. I think this is an interesting dichotomy to the general Teyvat culture we've known so far, where the seven nations are said to be heavily influenced by their respective Archons. In Mondstadt, while Barbados has been absent from ruling due to his ideal of freedom, the people of Mondstadt still love and worship him to this day, with many festivals and celebrations involving wine and minigames. In Liyue, its prosperity and culture through contracts has been constantly overseen by Rex Lapis, where, until we first arrived, Liyue has always held its annual Rite of Descension, receiving Rex Lapis's guidance for the upcoming year. In Inazuma, its people believe in and support the Raiden Shogun in her everlasting goal of eternity. The legacies of Barbados, Rex Lapis, and the Raiden Shogun are clearly seen in their respective nations. And yet, in Sumeru, there are hardly any mentions of Kusanali, and anything related to the leadership of Sumeru is tied to the Academia sages and the ideas from the late Rukkhadevata. Nahida legit has little to no influence over Sumeru, and it really shows in her character and inferiority complex. But throughout Sumeru's Archon quests, we do see how she eventually learns to slowly accept herself. Her character arc throughout the Archon quests was something I enjoyed about her character and rooted for, so I just wanted to make this video to just talk about her character growth. Let's start with her backstory, which is a big part of why she's who she is. I'll also be alternating between Nahida and Kusanali throughout this, just based on the context, where we generally know her to be Nahida, and the people of Sumeru generally know her to be Kusanali. Rukkhadevata was the first Dendro Archon where she granted life and wisdom to Sumeru and its people. Her greatest invention to this day is the Akasha system, a device capable of storing a database of the people's collective wisdom, readily, available for its people to access at any point. Very much beloved by her people, but unfortunately she had to give up her life to try to prevent the spread of forbidden knowledge, and created Nahida to one day cure Irminsul. When the sages first discovered Kusanali, they were happy to see the next Dendro Archon, but soon was disappointed when a mere child didn't possess the centuries of wisdom that Rukkhadevata had, and so sealed Kusanali away in the sanctuary of Surasthana, ironically the place where Rukkhadevata used to meditate. Nahida knew and prioritized her responsibility as an Archon, and so wanted to live up to Rukkhadevata, and this led to a misguided interpretation where she didn't feel adequate enough to be worthy of being the Dendro Archon. No matter how hard she worked, the sages continued neglecting her, eventually using the Akasha to misinform the people about Kusanali, where the majority of the people in Sumeru believe that Kusanali plays little to no role in Sumeru. For 500 years, Nahida spent her life trapped as a caged bird who only knows the world through the dreams of others. This is why Nahida has an inferiority complex. Literally all her life, no matter how much effort she's put in, she's never been acknowledged. I can only imagine how defeating it must feel to be a nation's Archon whose existence isn't even recognized by its people. Through Nahida's connection with the Akasha, she knows of everyone's neutral sentiment and lack of belief towards her. In the Teyvat story trailer, I think this is what Dainsleeve hinted at for Sumeru's story, where he commented on the Dendro Archon's inaction towards the push for folly. This foreshadowed that while Nahida is aware of the people's misunderstanding of Kusanali, she's accepted it, because she feels it doesn't matter since, to her, she should only focus on protecting her people and also her life mission, which is to save Irminsul. Whether she's misunderstood or underappreciated, Nahida makes no argument against it. But arguably, because of her self-negligence, she wasn't able to keep the sages in check and couldn't regulate their behaviors that would eventually lead to the conflicts and state of Sumeru, where there is active resentment between the rainforest folks and the desert folks, in addition to the censoring and manipulative information the sages spread through the Akasha. And so when we first meet Nahida for the first time in the Sub-Zero Samsara, after knowing her backstory, it makes sense to me why Nahida is so curious about observing humans and using funny dookie dookie analogies to explain things, because of her limited social interaction. It makes sense to me why she downplays herself, because surely, as she claims, Rukkhadevata wouldn't have let something like the Samsara happen. But it also makes sense to me why she's so invested in helping her followers, because I can tell she wants to be the best archon there is for her people. It's all she's ever done with her life to try to be an archon worthy of recognition from her people. While she's technically obligated to her duties as an archon, I think she also wants to be personally recognized for her efforts. The most relatable example I've seen of this is her appreciation of the Sub-Zerus festival, which celebrates her birthday. It's literally her most sought after dream, one where everyone's dancing happily with her. To Nahida, that's the end goal, happiness in life itself. I like this aspect of her character development, where even though we as the audience know that she's already been a great and worthy archon, it's up to her to acknowledge herself, because even though she's not the sun, it's the moon that accompanies the sweetest of dreams. And we know the value of dreams. Unironically, the sages played a part in helping Nahida's character development. Up until the Samsara, Nahida turned a blind eye to the sages' governance. Had they never tampered with people's consciousness during the Samsara, Nahida likely would have just kept having a passive role as the archon. But because the sages endangered the people's lives, Nahida personally involved herself in stopping them. In Act 3, she shows even more of her worth as an archon, where despite being in Dotori's threatening presence, she maintains her ground to save her people from Dotori's experimentation. I know there's the cliche of actions speaking louder than words, but you know, for a god that's been ridiculed and abandoned all her life, her commitment to being there for her people in their times of need is really admirable. Now, after having her consciousness trapped by Dottore, I think this is a critical point for her character development, because while trapped, she is finally forced to think about herself for once. When we try awakening her consciousness, she has an internal monologue. In the first part, she expresses her disappointment with her lack of progress catching up to Rukkhadevata despite all her efforts. In the second part, she realizes for the first time that she's never listened to herself, wondering if doing so is even valid for a caged bird like her. And it's this realization, with a little nudging from Rukkhadevata, that Nahida actually thinks, wait, what I think does matter, and that my thoughts do have value. It's funny that all this time there have always been people that have recognized her and that she's always had recognition towards herself. It's just that there was this mental barrier created by her mistreatment that prevented her from realizing this. And also, unironically, Dottore indirectly helped Nahida realize this by trapping her consciousness. I think sometimes we just need the time to self-reflect and to think about ourselves a bit, and Nahida did just that. I think maybe a way to summarize this character development for her is that to be a better archon is to be better herself. The final part of her character arc is her short-lived moment with Rukkhadevata. One of the reasons I love this scene is because of how many raw emotions that Nahida shows without saying a single word. There's hesitancy, uncertainty, shyness, reluctance, understanding, appreciation, sorrow, courage, and acceptance. It's a tall endeavor for Nahida, but this is the moment all her dreams have led her to, and she shows the strength needed to make the toughest decision. Another reason I appreciate this cutscene is how it thematically clarifies the legacy of Rukkhadevata. All this time, the sages and people of Sumeru have praised the Akasha device as the legacy of Rukkhadevata, and yet it isn't. As Rukkhadevata told us, the Akasha wasn't really meant to be used in this way. She originally created it to accumulate knowledge from her people to combat forbidden knowledge, and even acknowledged it was selfish for doing this to her people, since it essentially took away their dreams. And so it doesn't make sense for a device that takes away dreams to be her legacy. Her legacy should relate to her core values, which are the importance of dreams. So really, Rukkhadevata's legacy is Nahida, the one she created to finish what she couldn't, curing Irminsul, the one who also values the dreams of others, the one whose dream it is to have everyone happily dancing with each other. And that's why I love that at the end of Sumeru's Act 5, Nahida gets rid of the Akasha device, because really, it never should have existed in the first place. It's a bit sad to say this, but it makes sense that the Akasha's existence disappears along with Rukkhadevata's existence. I wanted to leave some quick thoughts on Nahida's story quest. I don't think I took away too much from it for this particular video, but I did just want to say that I appreciated the slow progress for Nahida being recognized by everyone in Sumeru. I liked that there is still some hesitancy from the people about interacting with Nahida, because they literally spent most of their lives being unaware of Kusanali. And Nahida too, who still finds it a bit difficult to understand human emotions, but as she spends more time with her people, she'll learn how to, which is, of course, fitting with her own natural curiosity. I think this is good character development. I liked the slow and steady progress. The title of the story quest, Lingering Warmth, is a reference to the feeling Nahida has that someone has helped her become who she is today, though she doesn't know who. Anyway, that pretty much wraps up my thoughts. I enjoyed seeing how involved Nahida was during the entire Archon quest, and I thought she had a pretty good character growth, where she finally began to accept herself, and realizing that there's still much progress to be made. I feel like that's all I could have asked for when we first learned about her and how she has imposter syndrome, despite being the god of wisdom. It's like she's finally sprouting from being a tiny Irminsul leaf to a big tree. I feel like she would say something like that. I think there's a lot to look forward to with Nahida in the future. The more Archons we know, the cooler their eventual interactions with one another will be in the future. I have a feeling she'll get along pretty well with A. She seems quite invested in Teyvat's general lore, where she's starting to look into the Descendants, the Sibling, the Abyss, and maybe even the Heavenly Principles. She's also likely investigating Dotori's claims of the skies of Teyvat being fake. If it's anyone's role to unveil many of Teyvat's secrets, it's fitting for the God of Wisdom. So yeah, that'll conclude this video, and as always, thank you for watching. As Xingqiu says, may knowledge guide you. With that said, till next time, have nice dookie dookies, and take care.